Welcome to DubLife Diaries, the podcast where passion meets the open road. I'm Joe Person, your host and also a lifelong dubber. Buckle up because this ride is just beginning. This podcast is sponsored by Volksmania magazine. Good times, great cars, awesome Volksmaniacs. Visit Volksmania.com to learn more about this class-leading VW magazine. All right. What is up, everybody? Welcome back to DubLife Diaries. This episode is going to be one of those that reminds us of why this podcast actually exists, okay? Because, we're going to talk Volkswagens. You can see them all over the shop behind me and behind my guests. We're going to talk builds. We're going to talk shows. We're going to talk Hot VW's magazine. We're going to talk SEMA. We're going to get into all of it, man. But really, this one isn't really about cars. I'll tell you, it's about people. It's about a dad and his daughter who loading up a couple old VWs and traveling around the Midwest, not chasing trophies, not chasing clout, but chasing connection, all right? Now, if you've ever been to a show and you've seen a 64 Bug called Bugsley, that's one that's not that shiny, not that perfect, but somehow pulls a crowd and, well, they love it. And then on the other end of the spectrum, there's the dude, which we're going to hear all about today. Hot Wheels Legends Tour, Hot VW cover. Like I said, SEMA, two totally different vehicles, but coming back with the same heart. Nick Jones is my guest, and he's one of those guys who reminds you that the whole thing that we talk about, this VW culture, this hobby, guys, it only survives if we let people touch it, right? Like it's a magazine. If we let the kids get in the cars, if we let the kids hit the horn, if we let them take a picture with the ride, because nobody remembers the 30-something people who never did anything, right? They never got in, they never touched it, they never had an experience. But we do remember the one car that we got into that we were allowed to get into as a kid. Nick grew up hearing Volkswagen stories from his German-born mother, flipped cars just to fuel his habit, and somehow built a life where smiles matter more than paint jobs. This conversation is going to go everywhere. Family, legacy, collecting, community, and why being imperfect might be the most powerful thing that you can build. So if you're listening while you're driving, if you're wrenching, if you're working, maybe if you're even working out, maybe if you're even zoning out, this one's for you. Nick Jones, welcome to DubLife Diaries.
What's going on, man?
What's up, man? Thank you so much for your time and for coming on the show. You and I have been kind of flirting back and forth for, I feel like it's been a few months before we were able to make something happen. So, man, thank you again for your time. Real quick, before we get into anything, I want to give a quick shout out to my sponsors. First up on the list is Volksmania magazine. You guys know how I feel. I feel like these guys are the flyest VW publication on the face of the planet. Why? Because it's the people. And I say it every single episode, but I will pound this into the pavement until I'm blue in the face because it's true. www.volksmania.com. Use DubLife10 at checkout for 10% off your first subscription. Also, shout out to the Salty Dub. From the beach to the bay, Salty Dub is tearing up the coastal VW scene. We got events and swag. Speaking of events, you can check out my shirt. We got V-Dubs over the Skyway. This shirt's actually the PM version, which is the night ride that we do in December. But coming up in April, we've got the daytime ride. We usually see between 200 and 300 cars for that ride over the Skyway. This one's going to be epic. Make sure you log into Salty Dub's website, saltydub.com. Same discount code, DubLife10, applies to any merch that's on the website. So check them out. Last shout out, and then it's back to you, my friend. NVT, Rod and Custom. My buddy Justin and Claudia Still out of Texas. Y'all, thank you. I told the story last episode. I'm going to tell it again. I came out to go to work last week or about a week and a half ago. And I come out about 6:30 in the morning. To my surprise, there's a nice good-sized box on my porch. And inside that box, 6 hats, 2 shirts, a whole bunch of keychains. These keychains are so cool as well. NVT Rod and Custom. The one side says, old VWs never die. No, they don't. Thank you guys so much for the support. And then, for any of you guys that are listening to the podcast, if you want to send me some swag, I'll give you a shout out, just like I'm doing them. But I feel like that's the community, right? They hook me up because they support me and this cause for me telling stories. So naturally, I'm going to support them. All right. Enough of me. Enough of the sponsors. Enough of the people giving me swag. My dude, it's back to you. So, for people that don't know you or that don't know you yet, who is Nick Jones outside of cars?
Oh, let's see here. So I'm born and raised Oklahoma. We live in Mustang, Oklahoma now. Um, three kids, a little bit of an age gap. I've got a 15, a 17, and a 29. Got a couple grandkids running around. They're 3 and 7 or 8. She's probably going to get mad at me because I know I screwed that one up. They're always hard to tell because my granddaughter is like tiny for her age, and my grandson is huge for his age. So I always think he's older than he really is because he's a really big guy. So let's go Thunder. Hopefully he gets Papa some tickets when he goes pro. We'll see what happens there.
Cool, man.
um, but stuff. I got a lot of stuff, and it's a good time. When we're not doing car shows, when we're not doing that, it's other things that turn into family activities. It's my daughter loves going antiquing with me and garage sales with me. My wife and I cooked up this arrangement years ago that she was like, I don't care if you do the car stuff as long as it pays for itself. So if you're doing your buying and selling or whatever, you can do that as long as you want to, as long as it stays out there, stays away, doesn't take over the house, whatever. And it spiraled out of control, and here we are.
Dang. Well, I can see behind you, and it's behind me in my background as well. But you got the live version of it, man. Full blown shop and all dubbed out. How cool. What an awesome thing to see. Most people would dream of even being able to be in a shop like that. And man, you get to call that home. So how cool. So tell me, what's a normal weekend look like for you these days, if there even is such a thing as normal?
Hopefully it's not cold outside. When it's cold, it kind of messes up all of my fun. But we still come out to the shop. My daughter is very active in scouting, so we have a lot of scout activities. She does a lot of volunteer work. Right now, we're working on her Eagle project. She's refurbishing a playground at Youth and Family Services, like a foster center. So we've had a lot of time in there lately. Lots of garage sales, lots of antiquing, lots of thrift stores. We try to go out to the lake a little bit in between car shows. My wife is a big lake person. She's not as hot on the car shows. So,
Mine's
it's a
not
give and
either.
take. I mean, now don't get me wrong, it's not like going to the lake isn't any fun. It's definitely a good time. A little too much fun at the lake sometimes, but that's a whole other story.
Right on. Now, your mom being born and raised in Germany, I kind of mentioned her in the intro. Tell me what kind of an influence that had on you growing up.
We grew up, my mom and my two brothers, but for most of the time, it was just her and I. I got drug around to a lot of German coffee things and dinner parties and Oktoberfests, and they were all military take home brides, and that's how they maintained some of their German heritage and their backgrounds, getting together and speaking the language and keeping memories of home alive. And so for me, I inherited the very direct, loud, overbearing a little bit, extreme need to be on time. A lot of those German stereotypes I grew up with, so I inherited them for sure. A love for the culture, the family, the way they interact, the way they stuck together, even all coming from different areas and coming to a place where they knew nothing about anything. Some of them barely speaking any English when they got here. Because we're talking, she came over in the '60s. So there was no YouTube or anything for her to research what she was getting into at the time.
Right.
But so it was a cool journey for sure growing up with them in that life.
Was Volkswagen, at all these the German culture, being around, as you just described, was Volkswagen just kind of normal in your household growing up?
The stories from a Volkswagen perspective we got growing up were it was what they learned to drive stick on. It was, they remembered they had, this color or that color. A lot of the military guys went over there and bought one because it was a cheap car, or, but the love for Volkswagens, it wasn't necessarily as big because it was like us looking at a Chevy Cavalier or something. It was just a car, to them. It wasn't a hot rod. It wasn't, it was cheap transportation.
Right. So probably not realizing early on that the stories that you were hearing were actually probably starting to shape who you'd become, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. Things, I've had a lot of different cars. I've had hot rods, low riders, crazy paint job, full size trucks on air ride, a little bit of everything. And I think, that kind of is what helped gravitate me ultimately back to Volkswagen is, that German heritage, that German connection, hearing about some of those cars that it was an easy connection when I got older, probably because of that background as I grew up, for sure.
In your background, you also mentioned, old bikes, old toys. Where does the collector mindset come from with you?
Collector mindset. My mom has all the stereotypical German knickknacks, little Hummel figures, and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So collecting slash hoarding, probably came naturally to me. I think with the bikes and the old toys, and for me, it's more about like life at a simpler time. We get caught up in the rat race. Everybody wants, the latest and greatest and this and that. And, I drive my tow rig or my truck sometimes, and I want things to shut up or stop trying to help me, or, do what it's doing, because, I'd like that simplistic, like you in the car going for a drive, just, like the bikes, like they're heavy, they don't ride well, but, kids were just stupid excited to get, an old Stingray because that was just Americana. It was, it's an icon.
Still.
And, the toys, I think with the toys, it's just, I'm a big kid. Ask anybody that knows me. I'm a big kid. So, getting some of that stuff just, it's just grabbing onto a piece of childhood, like most people that collect toys. I can't help it.
So my dad, my father, antiques and fine jewelry, done it my whole life. I grew up going to antique shows with my dad all over Florida, really all over the country, but mainly the Southeast. My dad still does it, man. He's 79 years old and he's still with us and he's still antiquing. And he's actually, he's raised me and my two brothers and my sister off of that lifestyle. And, so I know about the collector life for sure. And it really kind of was ingrained in me. I got trinkets and old collectibles, and I can probably tell you way more than you would ever anticipate, not just about history, but about things, right? Antiques and different things, different artists that made stuff and different timelines throughout history. But anyway, this ain't about me. It's about you. Something else that I wanted to touch on was I want you to tell me the story about your lifelong friend that you have that had this early 70s bug.
So, like I said, I grew up, was just my mom and I, little snot nosed kid, running around the neighborhood, and a few houses down from where I grew up, was still one of my best friends, a guy named Greg Lucas. His mom lived there, and he would come by a lot when he got off work, whether he was checking on her, helping her do stuff. I'm 13, 14 years old, and, he's much older than I am at that time. And he had hot rod Camaros, and and all these. I was a kid with Hot Wheels, and I looked down the street. Man, like there's a Camaro, like I have the Hot Wheels of, and we'd go down and we'd watch, or try to hang out, with the older kids because they were doing something cool. And I think, at least for me, there wasn't necessarily, a father figure. And so this was a guy that was willing to teach me, like, working on cars and installing stereos and building speaker boxes and, doing all this stuff that I didn't necessarily grow up around. But, it taught me a lot about the cars and life skills that I've used my entire life, and tried to pass on to the kids. But one day we'd become pretty decent friends, and he always wanted a bug, and so he pops up with this yellow, I don't remember, early 70s, had the dingle balls hanging across the front of the windshield. And we swapped the beam out in it and lowered it. And, we always joked about the dingle balls. And he's like, no, that's how it came. I'm not taking those out. I don't care.
Right.
And it's funny because I see things like that in my own life where I'm like, man, if I think it's cool, I don't care what you think. Like, I'm going to do me. And, we don't do factory stuff. Everything is, got to be a custom. We're going to do what we like. And if you don't like it, it is what it is. And I think I got some of that from him as well.
Do you remember, you say you're about 13, 14 at that time. Do you remember maybe the moment in time when it turned from those are cool to maybe, all right, I'm gonna have to get me one of these at some point?
Yeah, I think for me it was probably I had a 49 5 window rat rod pickup, slam, chop, stretch front end, and that. And I was doing the rat rod thing in the lifestyle. And another buddy of mine bought an oval window that was a oh, what do you call it? Uh, Volkswagen.
Oh yeah.
And
I love those, by
and
the way.
it was super cool. And at the time I had the rat rod, and I loved the rat rod because people hated it. And it got all the attention, but at the same time, all your street rod guys and your peers hated. And I looked at his bug, and it was kind of the same thing. Like, it was a Volkswagen, but it was a rag top oval window that somebody had made into that. And I
Right.
was like, man, I've never seen a Volkswagen before. Like, that thing was stupid cool to me. And and it was its own style, it was its own thing. And so that was kind of the moment or the time where I was like, okay, it's time for me to have a Volkswagen. I've always had that connection. I've kind of always wanted one. And it showed me that they could be more than just the same plain old Beetle that you saw, day in and day out online.
I think the Volkswagens are so cool. I've had a couple guys on the show that are very into them, and not just that, but have some very cool Volkswagens to the tune that it actually kind of made me start kind of changing my perspective of them and really start looking into them. I really kind of look at them now, the lower the stretch, the more ratty kind of custom, the better. I even like them when they're super shiny and really cool as well, but that's a whole vibe right there. The Volksrad. That's a whole vibe. And
Yeah.
this guy Lance Cohn is just a little south of me in Florida, and he's got a Volksrad truck, pickup truck. It's so sick, man. And he's got another Beetle that's stretched and got the stretched front end. And oh man, when I say that these things are sexy, I'm saying if you looked at it, you would be like, dude, that's a good looking Volkswagen for sure. Yeah, man. So let's touch on your background in kind of flipping or trading cars, because it looked like from your background when I was reading through it, you didn't just buy cars. You traded them, you flipped them, you kind of hustled your way through them. Where do you think that mindset came from at that stage in your life?
Um, I've always flipped some stuff from time to time. Just trying to make a little money on the side, or doing whatever. And when I decided that I wanted to go heavier into cars, or really get something that I thought was what I wanted, or something that I thought was really cool. I kind of realized that I couldn't afford to do that, with what I was doing at the time. So I had to decide to sell some stuff off and put a little bit of cash together. And I think I put like $500 together, and I bought a boat off of a guy. Got it running. The boat turned into a four wheeler. The four wheeler turned into a sand rail. The sand rail turned into a Harley, and I can't remember. The Harley turned into something else, and finally I sold it off. And I turned around and I bought another uh, motorcycle, another Harley, and that was about the time that the Volkswagen came around, and he was like, "Man, I got a buddy. He's got this 55 oval window that's super cool." And he's kind of thinking he might want to trade it off for something. So I get a hold of the guy, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm not really a Harley guy." And I was like, "All right, man. Well, I come across all kinds of stuff. What are you looking for?" Thinking, okay, I'll just flip my way into what he's looking for.
Yeah, yeah.
And so he's like, "Man, I'd really like, he names off a couple cars, and then he's like, and I'm really been into the shoebox Fords. I've always wanted one of those, and I've never had one." And so, I start hitting Marketplace, and I'm hitting Craigslist looking for everybody that's got a Ford shoebox. I'm like, "Hey, you want to trade for a Harley? Hey, you want to trade for a Harley?" And I finally come across this guy, and so I undo this trade. It was actually a pretty nice two tone, had the flathead Ford V8 in it. It was a sweet car. And so I get back a hold of the guy, and I'm like, "Hey man, I got a little shoebox here you might want to check out," and send him some pictures. And he was like, "You trade that for this oval window?" Like, heck yeah, because I looked at it from the perspective of, it's a long run down the road, but I've got $500 in it. Yeah, I spent some other money on stuff, but essentially I started with $500. So, if I can buy this bug for $500
Let's
on
go.
paper, or whatever you
Yeah.
want to call it,
Right.
like, I'm all in, let's go. And so he came over the next day, and I traded for the bug, and I'd had the car less than 24 hours. I took it on the gamble that he would want it, and it did, it paid off. Um,
Killer
but
story.
some of the other stuff that came along the way were, like I said, the air ride stuff. I had a 72 Nova. I had the bug in the background of one of the pictures, and that's actually how it got away from me. My oval is, everybody's got one they wish they could get back.
I was just gonna
And
ask you, you got any that you regret getting rid of?
the oval window is definitely, I wish I could get it back, but it was, at the time, this is probably 10, 12 years ago. And I had a 72 Nova, and I posted it for sale, and the bug was in the background of one of the pictures. And a guy calls me, and he's like, "Hey man, is that bug for sale?" Like, not really, but being me, I'm like, "Man, everything's for sale with the right money." And I was like, "But it probably wouldn't be worth it." And he's like, "Man, shoot me a number." And this is before Ken Diggett blew up Barrett Jackson with a bus, and bugs were still normal money back then.
Right.
And at the time, it's probably it's a 12, $13,000 car. And I was like, "Man, I don't know. Now it's not for sale." And he's like, "Man, just shoot me the number." He goes, "If I don't like it, I'll tell you to piss off, and I'll hang up on you." Like, all right. It's like, "All right, man, 17.5." And he's like, "Well, I'm in Fort Worth, but I can drive up tomorrow and come get it." And I'm thinking, "Oh, crap. Okay, well, I mean, I threw it out there. I thought I was going to be way too high." And so at the time, it was money that was too good to pass up on it. But especially now, as far down the road with VW as I've come, I wish I had the one that got me into it back. But
Yeah, yeah, cool.
last I saw, it went from there to Kansas to, it was in like Mecum auction in California, somewhere on the coast, the last time I saw it pop up on the radar.
Wow. Cool, man. Well, I have an interesting take. You meet a lot of people when you're negotiating and over time, like you said, all the flip-flopping and going from one vehicle to the next. If you looking back at it now, what do you think flipping taught you most about people?
It's I worked in retail for years, so is somebody going to buy? Is somebody not going to buy? Are they wasting your time? All that stuff that comes along with flipping
Profiling.
stuff.
Yeah,
And
like
I think
profiling
it,
people.
basically,
Yeah.
stereotyping. I
Yeah.
always, I always tell, my daughter when I'm joking with her, and I'm like, stereotypes aren't necessarily cool. It's not necessarily right to stereotype. But at the same time, the stereotype is the stereotype for a reason, because more often than not, it's right. Um, and we run into some of that. I deal with people, they want to ask 137 questions and then they hit you, at half of asking price.
Yeah.
And I think so over the years with the flipping and stuff, it's taught me how to read people. It's also taught me how you can 100% be wrong sometimes. I sold some fenders to a guy a couple days ago, and he was kind of wearing me out on the deal. And I just like, okay, if he takes him, he takes him. If he doesn't, because we'd set up 2 or 3 times where he's going to come get him. And I'm like, guy probably doesn't even have any money and he's probably just stalling. He's trying to get me to hold on to him until he can come up with him. And, they show up and they're in like a brand new Dodge SRT Trackhawk SUV, which is crazy money new. So the guy obviously had money and I was 100% wrong. But it happens. But it's definitely taught me, how to read people, but at the same time, I would say it's definitely taught me that you can't always judge a book by its cover.
That's interesting lessons, but certainly both, very accurate. Um, I've worked in sales my whole life, so I've had to learn that too. Especially my most recent stint was selling HVAC equipment. My most recent, kind of career of in-home sales, and man, I can't tell you the amount of times I'd pull up in a driveway and be like, "Oh man, here we go." There ain't no way this family ain't gonna be able to afford anything. And then you get in the house and they go for option one, $25,000 option. It's worth more than half their house, and they want to know if they can pay with cash. And you're like,
Yeah.
"What?" Right? So I've learned those similar lessons. But okay, let's fast forward a little bit to your wife's 70s tin top bus. Tell me a little bit about that bus, but also kind of follow it up with kind of what does she think about all this? Like what's behind you and like kind of all this lifestyle.
Gotcha. So let's see here. I'd have to give you a little bit of background. So my wife's
Yeah.
grandpa, he's 93 years old now. Um, Big car guy. He owned Chevy dealership back in like the late 60s, early 70s. So through the golden age of all the cool muscle stuff. And, he's a big kid. He's worse than me. If he wants something, 99% chance he's gonna get it, whether it's toys or whatever. He loves going to estate sales and he feels like he's completely wasted his time if he doesn't come home with something. But he's also a guy that, if you want something, you can tell him, hey, grandpa, I'm looking for this, that, or, we'd like to find a bus or, whatever. And you need to be fully prepared to spend the money on it because he's going to find it. Like and they live out in Northwest Oklahoma. They live out in the middle of nowhere. My wife graduated with 11 people, super small town.
Wow.
But like I said, it's amazing. Like I said, you better be ready to cut the check. And so, we talked a few times about, hey man, when you're going to these estate sales, when you're going in these barns, when you're driving through the country, picking up cars or, whatever, if you see a bus, man, let me know. And so he calls me one day and he goes, all right. And this is probably 6 or 7 years ago, something like that. He calls me and he's like, 74 Volkswagen bus. The body's in real good shape. The paint's all right. Interior's totally missing. He's like, but the body's, the body's good. And I'm like, without seeing it, man, it could be three, four, $5,000, and the motor's missing. And I'm like, but man, a good body, if it's not rusty, like I said, there's a few $1,000 there. And he's like, okay. And then what's a 70 running, driving? He's like, the body's rusty, but he's like, most of the interior's there and it runs and drives. And man, dude, that could be six, seven, $8,000, maybe even 10, depending on how rusty or not rusty it is. And he's like, all right, well, I bought them both. And I'll get them out to you here in the next, week or so. You can just pay me whenever. Like, okay, well, that's cool, Grandpa. What are these wonderful buses that you've already bought that I owe you for? What do we owe you for these wonderful buses that we already own? And he goes, "Oh, I paid $2,500 for both of them."
Oh, yes.
And like,
Score.
yes, okay, I can afford that. We'll take them. And
Yeah.
so he brought them down. I think I sold one of the 74 was yellow bus, and the body was straight on it, but it was, the later style motor, and I was kind of out on that deal. And but I think I sold that body for $4,500. So we essentially had, my wife's bus that we call Breezy, with nothing already in it at that point, with money to spare to, try to fix it up a little bit. You know, she, her, in the Volkswagen thing, she always thought the buses were cool. We tailgate some OSU football games and go to some concerts where people are staying in RVs or doing stuff like that. And she's like, well, if I want a Volkswagen, I want a bus. And so that's where that hunt began.
Okay.
And she's like, I want to be able to stay in this bus. I want to be able to get in this bus and, go to buses and balloons. I've heard about this, bus deal where, they have the balloon fest and people are camping out.
Yeah.
And so, and she didn't mind going to the car shows. It wasn't necessarily her scene, but, I definitely saw and seized the opportunity to, get her the bus that she wanted so that I could try to, suck her into this Volkswagen lifestyle as well.
Hey, she's in. She's in. So, I'm not going to say kind of a similar story because my wife doesn't like a bus. She likes the Carmen Ghia. And, she was kind of pulled into it by me, because it was more like, well, if I had to drive one, it would be, this one, which was Carmen Ghia. And that was by going to shows and stuff and seeing them, with me. But still, the statement that I made was, if I have to have one, it would be right. So it wasn't really
Yeah.
like, oh, I've got to, have one. Which was always for me. I always knew which models, which years, which motors, everything I wanted. But because of her supportive nature, being my wife, been together 25 years, she comes to all the shows. I set up my podcast tent at the shows now, and she comes and she posts up. It's a little tough because we've got a 6-year-old, as almost like our second stint on kid. You said there's a large age gap for you. I've got a 20-year-old, an 18-year-old, a 17-year-old, a 15-year-old, and then go down to a 6-year-old. So I got a little
Yep.
bit of an age gap. So I had four that were really close together, and then I've got one that's super young. I say that to say this: it's tough at the shows now because he was young and wanting to run around. Now, last couple shows, he's been going to art lessons and doing all, and now he likes to sit down with his art book in front of Dubs, and he likes to draw a picture of them for the owners and color them in and everything, and then he hands them to him and he says, I want money. Right. So it's kind of cute, right? But there's a little bit of an entrepreneurial spirit there. But the funny thing is, one of the last shows that we went to that he did that at, dude, he comes back to the tent at one point. My wife, he had $35 from people giving him tips.
Nice.
I'm like, bro, you're 6 years old, $35, that's doing it. So
Right.
yeah. But speaking of kids, because we're on this, talk to me about your daughter Bailey. Tell me how she got kind of pulled into the dub life. Was it intentional or did it kind of just happen naturally?
So, Bailey's always kind of been my sidekick. She's daddy's girl, and one of my best friends. And I was going to the Volkswagen shows, and she was tagging along with me. And as she got a little older, it was funny because some of the shows we'd go to, they wanted a kid to pull the raffle ticket, or they wanted a kid to hand out trophies. And she's kind of like me. She doesn't mind, being in front of the crowd. And
Sure.
and so, man, she kind of just became her own entity and personality. We go to the shows and they know me, but man, everybody knows Bailey too. The bug, so the 55, when it sold, I probably didn't have another bug for 2 or 3, 4 years, probably a couple 2 or 3 years. And I bought Bugsley, and that was our car. We were taking it to the shows, we're traveling all over with it. And she's got that collector mindset too. And as we decided we wanted to do the surf theme because that's kind of, at that time, that was the bug for me, the California look, the surfboards. And so as we're antiquing and we're running around, she starts Bugsley stuff. She's got to get more stuff for Bugsley. Look at that radio. That would be cool on the roof rack. Bugsley doesn't have any luggage. Bugsley doesn't have this. And so the more and more we went to shows, the more she kind of took over. I'd pull the bug up. Okay, where do you want it? Where do you want it facing? And then, she would take it from there. All the pink flamingos and and everything else that are Bugsley and its persona. At this point, it's all her. She's setting it up. She decides what goes with it and what doesn't, and what she changes. And
How old are
and
you?
she's 17 now.
17. Okay. Do you ever step back and really kind of maybe even realize to yourself like how rare it is for a 17-year-old to be kind of into the scene? Because I've got a 20-year-old, 18-year-old, 17-year-old, 15-year-old buddy, they could care less. I can take that back a tiny bit. I do. I just had a moment just a couple of weeks ago where my son had come up to me, my 17-year-old, and out of all my kids, he's my one that's a little bit, mechanical, always taking stuff apart to seeing how it works. And, he was always working on his dirt bikes. But he comes up to me a couple weeks ago and he says, "Hey, Dad, I think I'm going to trade the Gnu away." He's got a 15.6 classic Gnu with a little 15 horse two stroke on it, boat motor and trailer. I'm like, "Yeah, what you thinking? You gonna try to upgrade, get a little flats boat?" He goes, "No, no, 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 no. I got this guy that's looking to want to trade me a sand rail." I'm like, "Whoa, hold on, what?" Right?
Let's go.
Right? Exactly. So, I can't really say that none of them are interested. But for the most part, not. So again, I always like to kind of highlight that it is rare for the younger generation these days to be getting into these cars. But anyway, I didn't mean to cut you off. What were you going to say?
No, and my son's kind of that way. Like he'll come out to the shop and he'll help me work on stuff. And I think he's more interested in the mechanical aspect.
Yeah, yeah.
He's big into like the robotics team at school, and so I think more of the how does it come apart, how does it go together, that appeals to him. But with Bailey, it is rare, and it's funny because whether we grew up being guilted about certain things or not, I don't know. So sometimes I do the kids, and I would joke with Bailey or tell Bailey when she was little that man, I love doing all this stuff with you because I know the day is coming. I went through it, with our oldest daughter. I know the day is coming where I'm not going to be cool anymore. You're not going to want to hang out with me. You're not going to want to run around with me.
Right.
And here we are. She's 17 years old, and we're still doing all this stuff together. And I do. I mean, I know it's a one in a million, and hopefully it doesn't end. I know there's a good chance that it will one day. But it's definitely something that I still have to look forward to. I know if there's a show coming up, or hey, I read about this, estate sale on Facebook. Do you want to go? And she's like, heck yeah. So for me, it's it's allowing me to hang on to that relationship that,
Hmm.
for most kids it does. It ends when they're little. You turn into the ATM and the ride.
That's it. Can't say how well I know that feeling right there. But let's touch on Bugsley for a second. Bugsley, kind of a crowd favorite, just kind of looking at the past and the info that you had submitted to me. Why do you think people connect so hard with this car?
I think that it was part of the reason that, I kind of mentioned the surf theme. For a lot of people that's iconic, Volkswagen, that California look, the surfboards and stuff like that. We've got the window AC unit that hangs on it, and we've got maps and old cameras and stuff where it looks like you're, touring the coast or whatever. And I think people just connect with that. We've got a little single wheel trailer, Allstate single wheel trailer. I've got a Stingray that goes in the little trailer that matches the Bug. And I think it's because Bugsley has something for everyone. I get people that stop and they're like, man, I delivered papers on a bike like that when I was a kid. Or, they stop and they're explaining what that air conditioner, that swamp cooler is to people because they're like, what is that on the window? And, and dad's explaining it to the wife or the kid, what that was, the surfboards, the old radio that's with, there's so many different ways for people to connect with Bugsley, and I think that's why it does identify with a lot. It does attract that crowd, and we let people crawl in it and take pictures and take pictures in front and on it, and we let the kids crawl in it
Yes.
and I think it does. It just it makes people happy. I mean, at the end of the day, I think that's why Bugsley's popular because it makes people happy.
Yeah, I think it puts the statement you don't have to be shiny to shine, kind of puts a period at the end of that sentence. Let's touch on the dude. This is now, we're going to get into Hot Wheels Legends Tour, Hot VW cover, SEMA. Wow, right? I mean, just those three things in the same sentence. Did you ever think that building the dude would really maybe take it this far?
No, not at all. So I
Introduce the dude to us and tell us about it.
so the dude is a 1967 single cab. It's lowered, it's narrowed beam in the front. It's got freeway flyers, swing axle, tranny. The reduction box stuff is gone, so he can go down the road. Um, some custom interior parts to it. It's got widened Smitty smoothies on it. It's got a 2180cc, pretty much all CB performance engine in it. Weber 44s on it. Um, it's a cool looking shop truck. It's not quite perfect either, but we drive it. I don't drive it to shows 3 and 4, 5, 6, 7 hours away because I like air conditioning and cruise control. Um, but we do put the miles on it locally. I drive it to work. I drive it to the local shows. It's got some rock chips. So even though it does kind of have a cool resume, to me, it's still something we enjoy. It's not something that's put up on a shelf and pulled out when it's time to go be shiny.
Right, right. You use it. We talked about the kids, being involved, climbing all over them, taking pictures, kind of, and it says something about you, says something about your character. But I want to hear your take on this. If we were the opposite, if we were, parking a show car that we didn't let the kids in, like if we don't involve them, what's your perspective on what happens to this hobby?
It takes me back to when I was a kid and Greg kind of taking me in and letting me help, teaching me things and Bailey's getting into this stuff now, and so I feel like I have to do my part to get kids involved so that hopefully Bailey does carry on some of this stuff and it doesn't all just get scattered to the wind when I'm gone. It's making that impression on a kid and hopefully keeping this hobby alive for another 50 years or 100 years, that, without them, there's not going to be anybody to get into this. And so, I want them to go home and remember that one that they did get to climb in. I've been to a lot of shows where guys get upset with me because we allow people to touch and crawl in, and they said, "Oh, you're teaching those kids bad habits. They're going to walk around and they're going to touch everything else." And I said, "Well, I can't tell you what he's going to do to the next car. That's between him and his parents. But for me, I'm gonna let him crawl in. I'm gonna let him, beep the horn. It's got a big train horn on it, and we flip open the safari windows and I let the kid crawl in it. And, they're holding the steering wheel and they're taking pictures and their mom leans in close. And I'm like, hey, man, lean over and hit that button right there. And, I can't count the number of parents that we've scared the crap out of with the air horn, and the kids just light up, when they do. And that's what makes it all worth it.
Yes, yes, yes. Let's touch on that though. At the end of the day, what's all this really all about for you as a person?
For me, it is. It's about connecting with people and making new friends. I've met lifelong friends through the Volkswagen community that I definitely wouldn't have known, otherwise. It's passing that attitude on to my kids that, it's cool to be good to people. It's cool to include people in things, that you may make an impression on somebody that lasts the rest of their life. And there's a good chance that when you're doing it, you don't even realize you're touching somebody like that. And I think, for me, that's what the dub life is really kind of all about. It's, the obviously the cars are in the middle of it, but at the same time, it's a lifestyle of being cool to each other and having good times and making memories, and sitting around a campfire at an overnight show and just having a good time. I mean, it's just a laid back, family driven, inclusive environment for everybody. And not just in the car world. I think we could all use a little more of that right now.
No doubt. Especially the positivity. You had said earlier when we were talking about it that, these cars just make you happy. And I think that, that's important. It's important to be happy. It's important to smile. I used to teach a lot of fitness growing up, and I learned, way back in school that it took more muscles in your face to frown than it did to smile. So the science actually says that it's easier to be happy than it is to be upset and frown and be, kind of frustrated. So again, it's important that people are happy. And if these cars can make people happy, hey, sign me up for it. But as a
You
person,
know,
go ahead. Go ahead.
and I was going to say that, I always tell everybody has a Volkswagen story. Maybe some people have a hot rod or a motorcycle or whatever else you're into in the world, but like everybody has a Volkswagen story. You learned to drive stick on one. Your aunt had one. Somebody you knew in college drove one, and everybody's got a Volkswagen story. And I can't go to the gas station without somebody wanting to tell me, their Volkswagen story. And it's always super cool that no matter how detailed it is, or it might just be a small memory, or it might have been, something that was a big deal to them in their life, but everybody wants to share that story. And I don't know that, I'm sure that probably exists in other communities, but
Man,
it's big in the Volkswagen community. They
I
want
don't
to share,
know.
they want to tell you.
Right. Like I've had other classic cars, other classic trucks. I pull up at red lights, I pull up at gas stations too. And I don't get the same people approaching me, wanting to take pictures with it, wanting to, like you're saying, that's exactly what you're describing right now is exactly why I started the podcast because there's always a story and people are always so, I guess just excited to share, that first girl that they, first girlfriend or their first kiss or the guy they went to prom with or just, whatever. And it's always super cool stories. And I love that about these cars, for sure. And it really doesn't matter, which kind of air cooled Volkswagen you're in. It could be a Thing, a Carmen Ghia, it could be a Type 3 of any version, it could be a bus. Everybody's got stories with these cars everywhere I go,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah.
just like you're describing. So, touching on the hobby as a whole, how has the hobby changed you as a person?
I would honestly have to say once upon a time people that probably knew me better than they should have probably would have described me as, being a little short with people, not always the most, positive kind of guy. And, I think for me, seeing what a positive effect, kind of like you said, it's easier to smile. It's easier to, build something than it is to tear it down. And I think, me over the years, seeing how you can, inspire that stuff, it's probably made me, a chunk more positive. We all get grumpy, we get frustrated with these cars because if you drive a Volkswagen, you got to work on it, and it's probably going to give you problems. But I've
Amen.
definitely picked up, a more positive outlook comes from them, whether you like it or not. It's kind of infectious, kind of like the stories. You can't help it sometimes.
No, great.
Um,
Well said. All right, I got some rapid fire style questions. These are questions that demand a fast response. However, if a story comes of it, I hope it does. Feel free to jump in and tell it. All right. Okay.
Gotcha.
Favorite VW you've ever owned?
Got to be my 55 oval window.
Okay, and I had a feeling that you were going to go there with it, but how about this one? One VW that you'll never sell.
My wife's bus. That's something that came to us via her grandpa. He's 93. I hope he lives to be 137. But in the event he doesn't, we'll always have the bus.
And that story, which was such a cool story to hear and how you got it. All right, how about this one? Hopefully this brings up a story. Best show memory.
Probably going back to a couple of years ago. I'd been trying to go to Dub Splash. They had COVID killed it, I think a year, and then it got rained out one year. And we'd always heard about this giant show on the lake in Texas, and these cool cars that showed up to it. And so finally we get to go one year, and based on what I knew about the show and the pictures I'd seen, we went to Dub Splash, not planning to win anything, whatsoever, because we knew, like, man, this level of car, like, even with the single cab, like, we're probably not going to take anything home here. We're going to go, we're going to have a good time, listen to the music, enjoy the show. Hopefully the swap meet's cool. Um, and let's just go have a good time. And we got down there, and they do top 20, but they do 11 through 20, and then 1 through 10 is a different trophy. So they kind of have top 20 and top 10. And we got a top 10 trophy at that show. And it was crazy to me that looking around and seeing all these beautiful cars and being able to take something home at that show, where you get to a show and you might look around and think, man, we got a pretty good shot here, or no, we're probably not going to win anything. And like I said, we're by no means trophy hunters, but you get to a show, you can't help but kind of survey around and think whether or not you got a shot. And to go to a show like that with a level of car that shows up at that show and take something home was very, very humbling. It was a super cool experience.
Super cool. Thanks for telling that and sharing that with us. All right, here's one for you. Most overrated VW model. Overrated.
Honestly, I'd probably have to go back with the oval window. Even though it's kind of my car. They're cool. They're older. They're more rare.
They're
But
expensive.
they're expensive. the way some people who have them look at the other bugs and, like, oh, we have an old, that's just a
Oh,
super beetle, or that's just,
right,
all
right.
right, man, take your top hat off and calm down.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um,
Funny.
yeah.
All right, so opposite end of the spectrum, most underrated.
I would have to say probably a thing. I really like the things. It's something different. You don't see a lot of them at the shows. Kind of like, the single cabs. When people think Volkswagen, it's a bug. It's always going to be a bug or a bus. It's always going to be a bug or a bus. And I think the Carmen Gia for the styling, like your wife, she picks that out of the crowd, out of everything there.
Right.
And so I don't think the thing gets a lot of love, but I think it's a super cool, it's a super cool body. It's its own vibe.
I totally agree with you. And I had one just up through just last year. Speaking of my wife and I actually had a pretty crazy experience. Now you say you don't see a lot of them, and maybe not up where you're at. Down here, they're I'm not going to say a dime a dozen, but pretty close. I mean, you can an average first Friday meet. There's probably 5 to 7 things that are there, and you got the army version, you've got the standard stock version, then you've got the slammed, and then you've got the bag version, and so they're but they're super cool. I love being able to flop the windshield down, take the roof back, and and shift through the gears. It's just like riding a bike or a motorcycle,
Yeah.
especially on the
Being out in the wind.
yeah, being out in the wind. I thought it was cool. I really do, and I still do, and I would still have one. But I had a bad, crazy experience on the highway coming back from actually going out to survey some of the property that we had access to, putting together one of the Skyway rides last year. And I'm leaving, and this guy goes, kind of around me on the interstate as I'm merging and kind of cuts me off. And I was going to jump out of the lane that I was in, because he was cutting me off. And I'm like, I'm not going to slam my brakes. I'm just going to get over. Like, screw this guy, right? And my wife's next to me. And just for the heck of it, I decided as I was jerking the wheel that I'd look over my shoulder and just kind of look, back in that direction. And buddy, when I did, I was already on my way, in kind of merging into the lane. I look over my shoulder and there's a dump truck that's full load barreling down the highway doing probably 75, and I'm just getting up to speed. I just got into fourth gear, and dude, I'm telling you, that thing almost ran us over. It went by me. Wop, 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 wop. It was like this. It was like my life flashed before my eyes, quite literally. My wife's too, and it literally scared us both so bad that my wife's legs were shaking. My knees were weak. I was trying to shift on the way home. The whole way home, I'm going, "Oh my goodness!" Right? So we get home and my wife tells me, "Hey, respectfully, I love the hobby and I love that you do your thing, and I'm so glad that you have things in your life that make you happy. But I'll never get in that car again, just because of how dangerous it is. You got no seat belts, you got no roof, you got no damn windshield." She's like, "I just, I love you, but I love you so much, I'm willing to tell you that I really would prefer if you didn't get in that thing again as well." I'm like, "Oh crap, okay." So, pretty awesome Volkswagen community here. I started talking to a few buddies around here that, had some cars that were up for trade or up for sale. And I'm like, "Hey, I'm gonna get rid of the thing. I'll either sell it or I'll trade it off. What are you looking for?" Pre 67 Beetle. My wife wants me to get back in something that's got a roof. If I'm gonna get a Beetle, I'm gonna go pre 67. My buddy had Raphael, shout out, had a beautiful 62, all original 1200 6 volt, um, you know, couple spots, but original floors, original interior. When I say beautiful car, man, I mean it. Right now, more of a project than it is. My thing was up and going, had wheels, was painted, was a nice. But I've got this Beetle and the Carmen Gia, and again, this isn't about me, but I'm just telling you that story. All right,
Yeah, and it's funny because I'm not necessarily the same, but similar. I had a '62 Carmen Gia, beautiful bright red, super cool car. And my wife's big into the gym. She's always trying to get me to go with her, and so I was doing pretty good going with her for a while. And she's like, when you get off work, you're gonna meet me at the gym. I'm like, okay. And so I started to get in the Gia and drive, and I was like, man, I'm just lazy. Like, I'm going to be tired after the gym. I don't feel like shifting gears. Like, forget that. I'm just going to take my truck. And so I took off, and I ended up getting in an accident that day that I had at the time, like a 2017 GMC 2500 diesel pickup. It completely destroyed that car, destroyed another car that the lady ran a red light, pulled out in front of me, completely destroyed that car. I
Dude.
flipped up on my side, flew through the air, and flew into
Whoa.
another car, completely destroyed that car. Um, and I got out and walked away
Hey, that'd have been
from
it, buddy. That'd have been
a
it.
horrific accident. And yeah, I looked back on that thinking if I'd have gotten that Carmen Gia that day,
That'd have
nope,
been it.
I would not be here. Absolutely not.
Man, that is absolutely crazy. All right, now that we're talking about something kind of crazy like that, let me hear your worst breakdown story.
It's my worst breakdown story, and it's really kind of what solidified me in the Volkswagen community. Is I'm here now. I got these are my people, and
Okay.
there's a local show called the Old Folks Show. It's show we go to every year. Great show put on by our club, and I had that 55 oval window, and this is the first Volkswagen show I'm going to go to. And, I've been driving this thing all over, and it runs great. And following my buddy in his Volksrad, and we get, 2 miles away from the show, and it starts missing and popping and backfiring. And so we limp it all the way into the show, and I pull into a spot. And by the time I get parked and get out of the car, there's already like three people there. Hey man, what's going on? Let's pop the hood. And we pop the rear end. And you know this guy's like, well, let me pull this off and pull the distributor cap, and let's check plugs. And there's these three guys. I have no idea who they are, but I mean, they all immediately turned out to help. Some guy that they didn't know. They'd never seen this car before, and they'd never met me before. And I mean, I got all this help, and in 10 minutes they had it running great again. And I didn't even ask for it. And so that that sense of, yeah, that community and that willing to help, and that
There's
just,
always those guys at the show that can hear it
yeah,
when they can hear it when it comes limping in. They're like, oh, and they come walking on over, ready to help, tools in
and
hand. Love that feeling.
the guy that swoops in with the extra set of points from the glove box, or
That's right, right.
everything that went into it that day. But yeah, I mean, like I said, for me it sucked because I was like, all right, here we go. This is what everybody told me. These cars weren't reliable. And I finally get one, and freaking embarrassing, driving into the show. And then I get there and have that experience at the show. And it's like, okay, other car communities are good and they help people. And I'm not saying that they don't, but not at the level that the Volkswagen crowd does. And at that point, I'd experienced lots of other car cultures, but I was like, this is it. This is the one. This is home.
Yeah, love that. Good story. Thanks for sharing that. All right, again, rapid fire. Bikes or cars, if you had to choose one.
Whoo. Man, bikes are a whole lot cheaper. So I might actually, no, I'm still gonna have to go with the
Yeah.
Volkswagens.
Okay.
I've heard enough stories about delivering papers. I'd rather hear the Volkswagen stories.
All right. Give me some advice. Give me one thing that you would tell somebody, young or old, that's just getting into the Volkswagen lifestyle or what we know as the dub life. Tell me one thing that
Um,
you would share. One piece of advice.
be patient. I see other people coming in, and like they want to, they think they're going to build this beautiful car overnight. And, there's so many of these that have years into them, and people that piece things together. And and just be patient. Don't try to hurry and finish that engine. Don't try to hurry and finish that interior. You end up with something that doesn't turn out like you wanted it to. You end up with something that's not quite right because you rushed on it. Just be patient, man. It's going to come out just like you want it to, and I would say make it your own. Don't be ashamed. We see people, and somebody might think that car is a little crusty, but I'm like, man, to him, that's it. That could be the car they were dreaming of, or they have big plans for it. So just be patient and make it your own. Whether people think it's cool or not, man, make it your own. You do you.
Mm, great advice. All right, describe the Volkswagen community for me in just one word.
I mean, I think you already said it. It's community. It's the people, it's the cars, it's the stories, it's the stuff. I mean, there's so many things that make up that community, but I mean that's kind of what community is. It's people from all different walks of life. It's people that are into all different kinds of stuff and looks, and I mean that's the same in cities and towns and everywhere else. And I think that's what the dub life is really all about. It's about community. No matter what you're into, you can find people that are into that kind of bug or that kind of Volksrad or whatever. People that collect toys, people that collect vintage Volkswagen manuals. Whatever it is, it's a community, and it's a community that has something for everyone.
Yeah, well said. So what's coming up next? Anything next for Nick Jones?
Um, we were talking to this a couple days ago with another guy named Greg that's a good buddy of mine, and we were talking, and it was man, we go to some really cool shows, but I feel like we go to the same shows every year. Not that that we don't enjoy them year after year, and I was like, but I think this year I really want to peel back on a couple of the shows that I've been to a lot, and I want to go to some stuff that we've never been to. I know Florida Bug Jam is supposed to be something really cool. Octo just passed and we missed it, but that's kind of something that I want to find this year. Is I want to find a show that brings in 1,000 cars or something crazy, and just see a completely different regions take on it, or what is cool there, or just like I said, somewhere we've never been is something I would really like to do this year.
Bug Jam, super cool, man. I've been there. The podcast did the stereo contest. I started going to Bug Jam in the mid '90s. Just to tell you how my first Volkswagen was fresh out of high school, 16 years old. I found a '72 standard Beetle on the side of the road down here, and I couldn't wait to take that car to Bug Jam. Now, never entered the show. I would always take up and park on the outskirts and walk up because the swap was always cool. But yeah, man, Bug Jam's something that you have to experience. And then, hey, man, shout out to the shows that I'm putting on through Salty Dub all throughout the year. If you've never caravanned with 300 cars, even the first year I took that ride over, me and my buddy Alan in 2024 was the 25th year that ride was around. V-Dubs over the Skyway. We had 440 cars. The line coming over the Skyway Bridge was over 2.5 miles long. Okay, all classics. uh, just a total vibe. It's coming over, Tampa Bay. And then V-Dubs on the pier. If you've never, been on a peninsula on a little island, and seen, 200 cars, all together, show cars, rusty ones, shiny ones, not so shiny ones. We even got some water cooled love coming out there. Vendors, food trucks, it's an amazing experience. But there's a parade in the morning where we park, all the way down in a different area downtown St. Pete for our staging area because you're only allowed to come on. There's so much traffic at the pier. Just for sake of example, we got feedback from the pier this year. There was 13,000 spectators. All right, so just to tell you, they gotta stop that crowd. So there's only one time you can go on the pier and one time you can get off the pier. So we have to meet at a staging location, but then we parade, and the police, they shut all the streets down in downtown St. Pete. So anyway, my point was, if you're ever gonna make your way south and you want to come down to our shows, brother, you are more than welcome. Bug Jam's always in November, so if you're gonna make your way down there, Central Florida, you have to. Bug Jam is absolutely awesome. But okay, cool. I do want to
That's
mention.
awesome.
Oh, go
If
ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, you mentioned parade, and so I'll have to throw a shout out to my buddy Jeff that puts on a Eureka Springs weekend, VW weekend in Eureka Springs. So it's really cool. We talked about kind of the mix in the community. So there's actually 3 different shows that all happen that same weekend in Eureka Springs, Arkansas. So they have what they call the OG show, and it's nice stuff, shiny, super cool cars. And then at a Harley dealership across town, they have the Foul Air show, and it's, rat rods, patina,
Yeah.
like slammed out, air ride, like super cool stuff.
Yeah.
And then over at another venue, they have, they call it the Euro Rally, and it's water cooled, all water cooled stuff. And so, you can come in and there's, 1,000 VWs or whatever it is that come in. It's just the town is overrun with them, and you got a show for everybody. They got a trolley that'll take you to all the different shows so you can see all that stuff. And then Saturday, when the shows all end, they have a parade, police guided parade that takes you through old school downtown Eureka Springs, like some super cool buildings. There's always awesome pictures that get posted from people after the fact, and the streets just get lined with people, and everybody's throwing candy out of the cars, and
Yes.
it's a cool time. It's an awesome weekend there.
Yeah, man. Awesome. Yeah. Love the parade. Certainly love that time, and it's growing. It's only been back a couple of years. So, but it's already growing. There's already spectators, and it's already starting to really, turn into a really cool kind of a monumental event again. I do want to give a shout out to your daughter Bailey. I think it's cool that a young, person is going to be into this, female especially, and that's not anything male or female in this. It's just the stigma, right?
Yeah.
It's society as a whole. So I want to give her a shout out, Bailey. Maybe one day you come on the podcast, you tell your stories about growing up around your awesome dad. Also,
That'd be
real
cool.
quick, I want to give a shout out to Hot VWs. Your issue is May of 25, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so check that out if you guys get around to it, May of 25. Brother, I want to thank you, man, for coming on the show again. Thank you for telling the stories, right? It's not just about the cars, it's about the people. I say that's what DubLife Diaries is all about. Good people, good times, and obviously letting the little things happen, like the kids getting in the cars, etc. So, thank you. And that's a wrap for this episode of DubLife Diaries. Thanks for riding along with us and diving into these incredible stories of the people in the dubs that drive their dreams. If you love today's episode, don't forget to subscribe or hit that follow button so you never miss an adventure. Do you have a story to tell or know somebody else who's living the dub life? Awesome! Reach out to us. You can find us on all socials at DubLife Diaries, or shoot me an email. I'm not hard to find. DubLifeDiaries@gmail.com. Until next time, keep the engines humming and the wheels turning, and always follow the road that inspires you. This is Joe Person. I'm signing off. I'll catch you on the next ride.